You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
So welcome. This is WCAT. This is Dr. Peter Mango. We're going to be interviewing Dr. Anthony Rizzi of the Institute for Advanced Physics in Louisiana. Dr. Rizzi, welcome aboard.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Well, Dr. Rizzi is the author of a number of books, including, I believe it's The Science Before Science, correct, Doctor?
That's right, yes.
And it's been on the Eternal Word Network, and recently, I believe, was involved with groundbreaking research on black holes using laser interferometers. Is that correct?
Yeah, the LIGO, we use lasers to detect gravitational waves, which indicate the presence of black holes.
Amazing.
Black hole in spirals, I should say.
Fantastic. So, why don't you tell us, Doctor, something about the Institute for Advanced Physics?
So maybe you'd like to hear some of the history of what happened. You know, I'm been a physicist, basically, since out of high school, but maybe you can consider before, because I've been interested in physics from very young and studied it, and almost left the faith because of the dichotomy that I saw between, the sort of loose thinking that I saw in my upbringing, post-Vatican II upbringing, where it seemed to be about, making banners and how do you feel about things, and not about, intellectual growth or anything like that. And whereas in the science, I was getting that, and I was thinking, this is just what the scientists are saying it is, which is some kind of, make yourself feel good plan, which I didn't think I needed. So, and I thought was kind of silly. So I gradually was moving away from it. And then I went to MIT for my undergrad, and I got into a dorm that had a book that had Adler's great book series in it, which of course included the Summa.
Wow.
And so I would read some out of that book, and I was always thinking maybe, it's not because of my upbringing, which is a good Catholic upbringing, that there's something good about it. And I didn't know what it was, except it was much better than the things around me. And I thought, well, there might be something, there probably is something here. And I saw my dad as an intelligent man. I thought, well, I'll look into this. And as I read it, I fought with it, because I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, I could see that it was a totally different thing than what I'd confronted up to that point. It was more like the math texts that I was reading than it was like anything I'd been presented really in my upbringing, my intellectual side of my upbringing of the faith. So I figured there's something here, and I fought with it, and I gradually realized that there's a lot of stuff there that I just have never been exposed to. And so I gradually started asking priests and people about it, and they looked at me like I was crazy, like that St. Thomas guy, he's out, that's passé. And I'm sure you've experienced that. And so I stopped talking to very much to priests and other Catholics and stuff about it, and I started trying to look for other materials about books and things, and I came across Gilson and Maritain.
Okay.
And so I started reading them, and I started thinking, wow, okay, so this is opening it up, because I found, I found it very early on. There's this guy Aristotle that keeps coming up. So I went to try and read some of that, and that I just didn't get anywhere with that. I just thought, I don't understand what this guy's talking about at all. Why is he spending so much time on all this other stuff? And it seemed it just didn't make sense to me. I couldn't say it was wrong. I just couldn't get hold of it. So then what I did is I went and saw that these people were also talking about this Aristotle guy. And so not very long after that, I found the commentaries.
Okay.
And that's when I started to think, okay, well, this St. Thomas can tell me what this guy's talking about.
Right.
And that's when I gradually started understanding that, and I started realizing the dichotomy. But I tried to find something, somewhere, somebody who connected the physics that I was working on, which I was having significant progress on and making significant contributions in. And there was nothing. There was basically nothing. People that talked used the words of the physics, but it was clear that they didn't understand it. I found Duhem, but I found him to not really try to answer any of the questions.
There'd be Pierre Duhem for the audiences.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, Pierre Duhem, who's very smart, good physicist, and taught me some history that I just wasn't aware of about the Middle Ages. And
now, did you read that in French? Because he wrote about 10 volumes, I think, of largely unpublished or untranslated.
Yes, I read some of it in French.
Wow.
But I read some of it in English because some of it had been published. In fact, I was in England, and I remember going to the bookstore there and asking. They said, "Well, there's no books on anybody. There was no science in the Middle Ages." And this was the keeper of all the manuscripts and stuff. And so. But yeah. So I got pieced together on it, and then I also met Father Yaki.
Oh, you met Father Stanley Yaki, the Benedictine.
Oh yeah. So he and I started talking, and he taught me a lot through his books and through conversations, but mostly his books. I learned some of the stuff about the history, and through that, so through those people. But there was no connection to the physics. What does this mean? What does it mean when I write the Einstein equations down and all the stuff that I was doing? It was clear that there was no even attempt, and mostly clear that the people didn't know any of that. I mean, Duhem was before the great, advent of all the avalanche of advances of the modern physics. And he also was just not addressing the issue either. And it so started bothering me, and so people started asking me about it, and so I got an offer while I was working on my physics to write a book, and I thought, okay, well, it'd be a good time to put some of the things that I figured out down. And as I was writing the book, I realized, and because I always thought, when I'm an old man, I'll do something about this. And when I was writing the book, I realized how much I knew and how little that other people knew of what I knew, because I didn't think what I knew was that much, and it really wasn't that much compared to what had to be done, but it was certainly a lot more than anybody else. So that's when I decided to write my book, The Science Before Science. I mean, that's when I decided to not just end with my book, The Science Before Science, because I was writing The Science Before Science, so I thought it was helpful, but as I wrote it, I realized how much that it was needed and that how little people knew about it. And by the time I finished it, that's when I thought, well, I can't just leave this here because there's just too much to do. There's a whole project of things to do. So I had taken like a half-time sabbatical to take the time to write that book, and got some grants and stuff to do it. And I realized this has to continue. And I met various people, including Ralph McInerney and Father Benedict Ashley, who immediately became involved in the project from the beginning, and encouraged me, and multiple other people, and so that's how the Institute for Advanced Physics got born. As I just said, we have to do this work. The physics has not been understood, and so I realized basically the beginnings of the magnitude of the work that had to be done. And because when I first started realizing this, it was kind of daunting that there's just nothing done on this, nothing to answer like simple questions like, what is mathematics? The modern meaning of the word mathematics is totally different than the ancient meaning. And
can you explain that distinction?
Yeah, so it's in my book, The Science Before Science, and I have an article on that's in our magazine, our magazine Physics and Culture on the Institute for Advanced Physics website, iapweb.org. And basically mathematics, so there's so many things to talk about, but the mathematics that we have today, so let me just give, if it's interesting, I'll give a little history of how we got to math the way it is. So math the way it is today the scientific revolution, again, which nobody really knows what it means. Nobody's really answered that question in a clear way till the Institute for Advanced Physics came along. And that is, it's not simply, I'm sure you've heard like the hypodeductive method, right?
Yes.
And that's not, what I tell people, the hypodeductive method is you make a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and then reform the hypothesis and keep growing like that. Right? Is that the way you've heard it?
That's the most popular version, although there are variations. Yeah.
There's variations on it, but that's that. And so that's what most people have in the back. That's what pretty much everyone has in the back of their mind. And what I like to tell people is that, that would make every pre-modern pretty stupid, because it's what every child does. Let's say that hurt. I'm not going to try that again. Let me try something different. It's not something that is very profound, and it's not certainly something that could explain the explosion of knowledge that happened after the scientific revolution. But again, I bring it up because it's sort of the dichotomy that we face in our understanding that these everyone knows the scientific revolution is what established modernity in some kind of confused way. They know that, but they never really ask themselves these kind of questions, and it's a fruit of the problem of the scientism that we have today. That and why I felt so impelled to start doing in parallel to my modern physics research, this deeper kind of research to understand what I was doing and to help other people understand what I was doing. But mathematics begins in the modern sense with Descartes, and that's really the genius of Descartes. His false philosophy is, of course, not a genius thing. It's a confusing, hard thing that causes a lot of problems. But the genius is really, and it's not Descartes, right? These things that happen in history, there's iconic people who sort of led the way, but there's always other people around them, and there's people before them that feed them.
Yes.
And so he was an iconic person because he did do a lot in this arena. But what he did is he was the person to invent what we now call algebra.
Right.
What we now call algebra, but like what you take in 9th and 10th grade or something. And that's startling to people because, the word algebra is an Arabic word, and a lot of people attribute the discovery to the Arabs or something around that time. But that's only because they don't see this distinction that happened at the scientific revolution, which starts with math, which is the idea that you don't look directly at the thing, but you interpose a symbolic system of a logical system of symbols in between you and the thing, so that the output of the symbols is what you focus on. So in algebra, when you solve an equation, even if you get an answer like square root of -1, it doesn't mean anything directly in the physical world. You call it a solution.
Yeah.
That's why, we're talking about complex numbers. That's why we have, the advent of complex numbers around that time, is that you now have you look at the general solutions, and that's not, you don't have algebra until you look for general solutions, not just solving this or that problem. So that was the big shift in the scientific revolution in math, is to move from the thing to an equation.
Okay.
From the thing to an equation, and then that then moves to, in physics, to do the same thing, as the parallel thing in physics. And that starts with Galileo and really comes to its first real fruition with Newton. And now Newton didn't use equations per se, but it was all easily digestible in equational form because it's all a logical system, self-referential system that you can then easily write in equations. And today, we summarize Newton in F equals ma and F equals gmm over r squared. Not to scare anybody with those equations, but there's just two equations that summarize all his work, and that's the depth. That's the depth of the scientific method, that it can really take and encapsulate huge aspects of reality in a system of symbols called an equation. And then thereby, you don't have to know what you're doing. You just turn the crank on the machine and it gives you output.
Yeah.
so you don't, and so that hence modernity, where we turn cranks and we get out answers, and we don't necessarily know what we're meaning, and we certainly don't know what we mean in any clear way.
Now, you have the 4 steps of learning at the Institute, and it can take as much as a year to sort of inculcate these. You've explained this before, and I think that on the one hand, those of us with more of a humanities background may be somewhat hampered because the logical inductive aspect may be there, but not as rigorous or demonstrative. On the other hand, those trained in the hard sciences can sometimes show their own limitations. Could you unpack the 4 steps to learning as it taught at the Institute for Advanced Physics?
Yes. So maybe I should start with the Central Theorem of the Institute for Advanced Physics that really encapsulates, the need for the 4 steps and why, what was driving me, even when I didn't quite understand it completely, to finally end up deciding to start the Institute for Advanced Physics. So the Central Theorem of what we call the Central Theorem of the Institute for Advanced Physics, don't get scared by that. It's just a simple set of propositions that you can see are true. So you look at the world, and everything comes through through the senses. So your 5 senses are your portal to the world, and so everything comes through through the senses. If you're going to know about God, or if you're going to know about the nature of your own being, you're going to have to start with what you see and then reflect on that. And so physics, which is simply, in modern language, that's what the study of the physical world is, physics. And a physicist will tell you that if his work is general enough that it'll apply just as well to a rabbit as a rock, or as a man as a rock. It's general; it covers all physical things. And so everything we know starts with our understanding of the physical world of physics. And now the next step of the theorem is, that everything therefore depends on that. And because it's the first thing and everything builds on that. And then the next step is, what is our physics today? Well, I open up any physics book and you'll see what it is. It's a bunch of equations.
Yeah.
But that doesn't answer questions. Thomists want to say things like, that we've left out final causality, or in modern physics, or it's focused on just using numbers, and that really is not true. It focuses on the system of symbols, so it's stuck in a symbolic system that, for the physicist, he works close with reality, so he feels the reality all around him. But in terms of when he talks about it, it's in terms of an equation. When he's talking to you, he's really using an equation. So our physics, your physics, my physics, every non-physicist's physics is an equation. It's not a what is. It doesn't. Not only doesn't answer the why, it doesn't answer the how or any of that. It doesn't even answer the what.
Yeah.
And so that's a bad physics upon which all of us stand. So therefore, everything we think and do and say is to that degree erroneous and confused. And so that's the danger of it, and that's the scariness of it all, is that we have this bad physics, and all of us are doing things against what we'd like to do because we have these errors coming from the bad physics. So to fix it, you have to go back and find out what we figured out in these equations, so that we can have a real understanding of what we're doing. So when we think in a way that doesn't skid past and often even deny reality. So in quantum mechanics, for example, there's many people who hold the Copenhagen interpretation, which means that something's not there basically until you measure it. It doesn't, what we say, collapse into a thing until somebody measures it.
Yes. So
you can see that that you have a very non-sensible understanding of the physical world, where the world doesn't have its own existence. But that's what you start with. You already see there's things out there that exist, and that you then somehow have forgotten that is it's a science before. The point I make in my science before science is that there's things that and then you build modern science from that. And you have to get back the clarity of how you did that. How did I start from here and go to there? And then say, what do I mean? What do I mean by mass, inertial mass? What do I mean by gravity? What do I mean by time? What do I mean by, all the different things that physicists use that we wouldn't be able to answer right now, and that's distorting our culture. So to learn, we have to go back to the beginning, and to do that, we have to realize the steps of learning that we have to take to get there, and that is, we start again with the physical world, and we get to do some principle, maybe in any particular field, and with that principle, we have step one. So there's 4 steps, and the step 1 is get the principle. Step 2 is habituate it in your mind, run it around in your mind, think about it. Let's see, maybe while you're driving somewhere, how would that work? And how does it connect with this other thing I know? Until it's kind of set in your mind, until you have it kind of floating around and it pop in your head and you want to wonder about it. And then in step 3, you now enter the sort of practical sphere where you say, what do I do with this new knowledge to gain further understanding of my world? And then in step 3B, the second half of 3, you say, how do I do that action? So let's say you're trying to learn the piano. Then you probably, in most of these steps, you want some kind of coach to help you that already has been through it. But maybe you have a piano teacher and he tells you, okay, what you have to do is move your hands like this, and you look at these notes on this thing, and then once you figure out what you're supposed to do, then in step 4, you practice it until it's part of your emotional structure. So that you're playing that piano, when you hit a bad note, you go, you kind of cringe, but if you're a bad piano player, then you keep playing, you don't even notice. You're perfectly happy. And so that's what the essence of any virtue is. It's knowledge incarnated. It starts in the physical and ends in the physical. And so that's what's needed, and that's why it takes, a year or more for our members to really get this material in our courses. But anybody can get this material. I don't want people to think it's just for physicists, because we all need it. And the more that we spent the time getting our lives right, and we've had people's lives, what happens is people's lives change around when they learn this material. We've had multiple.
Wow.
We have made people come atheistic, and then they're all of them are, end up knowing that God exists and change their lives. And there's one particular young man who is just learning Christmas songs because he was an atheist. He never paid any attention. He thought Christmas was stupid.
Wow.
But that's what happens when you start back. You come back to your senses, and you start your senses, and you get that. So everybody can do it. And I taught there's a DVD on the site that I think people will like. It's where I took my daughter. I sit down with my daughter when she was 6 years old, and I walk her through First Communion in light of the physics that we get through our senses that doesn't diss modern physics, but actually integrates it for the first time, so that she can hear it, and you can understand the doctrine of transubstantiation, and you can see how without this, you don't really enter the faith, because faith comes after reason. Reason comes first, then the faith, because you can't make a proposition until you have content to make that proposition. You can't believe how I got to work today until you know what a car is, or what a road is, or what a man is. Even no matter how much I would try to convince you, if you don't know the basic content of those basic things to do with the physical world, then you can want to believe me, but it won't help. So faith comes after reason, comes after this sense input, and that's really what we're trying to get people to see. But to really do it, you have to commit yourself. You have to take the time, because you're struggling against a physics that your culture has implanted in you that you don't even know has been implanted in you. So that's what makes it so hard. You don't realize that you're controlled by these things. And so that's what the Institute does, is that, we educate these physicists, and as well now as other science people, but also now we're doing non-physicists. And as you say, non-physicists have different burdens that they carry than us physicists. We both have burdens, they're kind of distinct burdens. But, it's a process, and it doesn't happen overnight. And that's kind of what happened to me, is I gradually sort of realized that, the need that I had, that I didn't know. And so then you have to go through and you have to find out. And that's the thing, is we've done that research now, so it's available to people. On our site, there's all kinds of articles about different subfields that they can get information on and learn about it. But one of the articles is, by the way, How to Learn in 4 Steps, which would go through that. And that, by the way, is going to be published again in Latin Mass magazine. I think it's coming out this month.
That's very interesting. You brought up You brought up the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Now, you also described something regarding quote unquote spooky action at a distance at the quantum level, the inferences people take away from that about if two photons are sent in opposite directions, that they are alleged to be entangled by some, meaning that if you affect the charge of one, it may or may not impact the charge of another. There are a lot of claims that surround that, but you've done statistical averaging, studies of this on your own. I mean, what do you take away from quote unquote spooky action at a distance?
Yeah, so again, that's part of the bigger picture, is that each one of these things, without the grounding in the physics that you get through the senses, and starting with what Newton figured out, you can't really get to the point of answering quantum mechanical questions, and that's what we've done. And by the way, there's a book that I think everyone needs to get. It's called The Kid's Introduction to Physics and Beyond, that takes you from the simple physics and proves and shows you how that simple physics, which is basically integrated into the basic understanding of modern science. In other words, modern science reveals more specificity than the ancients ever dreamed of knowing. And that's within the book. But it leads you to the unchangeable changer, to God. Shows you that God exists. And that's sort of a preamble to really understand how I'm going to answer your question about the quantum mechanics. So in quantum mechanics, so first of all, I should say, because people don't understand the scientific method, that it is, and it's defined in that kid's book, that as looking, the most dense way is looking at the world through the property of quantity, and that'll be in the kid's book to learn what that means, through the property of quantity, using a system of symbols, especially equations, to make predictions about the world. That's the scientific method. It's nothing like what anybody's taught you. And that scientific method, it's great and wonderful, but it has to be understood and walked through. And if you don't look at those steps, you'll miss, and you'll think, like a lot of people outside the hard sciences don't realize that really a scientist, the hardest sciences are math and physics, and they get weaker as you move out. Chemistry and biology are hard sciences too, but they're much weaker because they're more distant from the basic way that this method works, which I can describe if you want later. But the point is that the quantum mechanics, has a robust understanding in an equation. It's not statistics. Most people's experience with science is statistics because they've taken sociology and very soft and weak sciences, and they think science is statistics. It's not what it is. If you kind of remember back from when you took mechanics, there's no statistics in it. Statistics is a weak point of view when you don't know what you're doing, that you have to do statistics. It's when you don't know what the dice is going to do that you use statistics. You don't know that the dice is going to come up 6. It's going to be one of those, and that's when you have to use statistics. So because these other sciences are so weak, most people think that sciences are about statistics. Quantum mechanics is not about statistics. It's about an equation called the Schrödinger equation. And that equation ends up having to use statistics because there's a lot of stuff we don't know. But it does, even though it has a statistical element to it, it's revealing something non-statistical about the world. And one of the things it does reveal is that there are superluminal communications between things. That seems to be, a necessary output of what we understand about the world, the specificity that we understand about the world. And so there is entanglement between two things, and it's superluminal. We don't know that it's instantaneous. Quantum mechanics would have it be because it's a the Schrödinger equation. There's very many complications to say here, but the Schrödinger equation is what's called non-relativistic. It's for things that go slower than the speed of light. So you don't expect it to tell you about those things. To answer your question, there are these superluminal connections between things, and there is entanglement, and there's been demonstrated over fairly large distances at this point, and trying to push to see how far it can go. But the quantum mechanics reveals definitive non-statistical things, and my recent work in quantum mechanics is to really bring home in a way in modern physics, bring out in modern physics terms what the meaning of these things. And so it's really made some stark breakthroughs, because people before this hadn't really digested some of the work that had been done on what it means to, in what quantum mechanics means, and that it doesn't involve, the equation itself doesn't mean that things aren't there. Obviously, it can't mean that, but I show what it does mean, and that's really, been radically shaking things quite a bit. That's my last few papers over the last couple of years have been talking about that.
And do you have a title for those papers? Obviously it's for the specialists, but just in case there's a specialist listening.
The one of the places to start is, let's see, I can't remember the exact title, but if you look under the archive under my name, you'll find
at the Institute for Advanced Physics.
No, the archive, the archive is a place you publish papers. Spelled ARXIV, ARXIV, archive. And if you just search for my name, you'll find these papers on quantum mechanics. One of them is called a simple, the simple natural approach to measurement that really shows the proper way to understand the Schrödinger equation and more generally quantum mechanics. But you'll see the other papers that are related, and the experts will know. But people that know a little bit of physics can look at why I mentioned the simple approach to measurement paper is that I think that sort of bachelor's level people could follow that paper. It's meant to be, for that kind of level and beyond, but it also, the archive will reference people to the papers in other journals.
Wonderful. Now, we only have about 3 minutes left, but in that time, I did want to ask you, this is something more of a personal question, I suppose. Looping back, sort of completing the circle, is for someone who studies something that is at the quantum level, that's small, and at the same time the megascopic level, like black holes, as you've been doing, and the numbers that we see. Just I'm talking about the headlines of the layman's science blogs and whatnot. In terms of the size of the quote unquote structures of galaxies and so on at outer limits of the observable universe. What kind of feelings does this induce in you or other researchers, if any? Does this have, in terms of your conception of space and time and of man's role within it, your own role within it, what kind of reflections do these induce, if any?
Yes, I would say that's a really good question. I would say two things. One is that the physicists, outside the Institute for Advanced Physics people react differently than non-Institute for Advanced Physics people. Within the physics community, you really, as you can figure out, that the modern scientific method kind of makes opaque the beauty and density of beauty of the universe, and so it doesn't typically with them connect to God. In fact, it goes the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, because it does encapsulate it, there is a sort of wonder about it. It's sort of the top level physicists all kind of share this. This is pretty amazing stuff, but it doesn't. It's so disconnected from the real because the physics is so ungrounded in a primary way that it doesn't generate connection to your own life in any kind of healthy way, or and certainly God. And I think that people have to realize that and as of 2000, and it's much worse now, only 7% of top scientists even believed in God. And it's much worse now, and it's because of that effect. So I think people need to realize that, because a lot of the popularizers, Catholic popularizers, make it seem like instantaneously it leads to thinking about God. And if it doesn't, it must be, some kind of moral problem. And it's not really true. The way it's set up, the equation doesn't do that. But there is a rubbing with reality that creates a sort of analog of it, if you will. But for myself and the members of the Institute, it's really amazing to see the deepening understanding of yourself and of God and of the creation that He made, and the magnitude of the truth of the Catholic faith that's revealed in that, and the fact that St. Thomas had the fundamentals of this, and it's only really in the Church, even though even in the Church today we've gotten so many problems post Vatican II that's only in minority, but it's still clearly part of the structure, the developmental structure of the Church. And it's amazing to see these things, how deep they they are and how deep they go, and how much, when you add the specificity that you have through the equations, that it really lights up the nature of creation and really helps you understand, theology and scripture, and just really gives you that wonder at the level that's human. And but I really do want to reiterate that takes a lot of this kind of work. The other direction, it goes the other direction. It's a strange thing to describe, but that is not the experience of people outside the Institute for Advanced Physics. In fact, that's one of the first things that new physicists struggle with, is they understand, the kind of output that usually happens to people is that everyone basically ends up, because you prove it to them, that knowing that God exists. And then there's this attraction that starts happening to the Catholic faith.
Wow. That's remarkable. That's really remarkable. It reminds me of what Aquinas said about a constant need for conversio ad phantasmata, meaning returning to the data of sense experience.
Yeah.
And his teacher was St. Albert, the patron saint of scientists, who was so engaged with the material physical world. So I always imagine that that's where he got that approach from, and how they help set the sciences, at least on theoretical foundations. In any case, I really regret that we're out of time, because I'd love to keep talking to you and ask you some more things. But in any case, Doc, we really appreciate your time. So that's the Institute for Advanced Physics. Do you know their website, the URL offhand? I mean, I'm sure, easily accessible, I'm sure, on the...
The Institute for Advanced Physics is our website. It's iapweb.org, iapweb.org. And you can go to, on that home site, there's a store button you can click and get those resources, or also you can go to the Physics and Culture magazine to get some of the other things that we mentioned.
Wonderful. So hopefully everybody out there who is trying to explore the relationship between, the intersection between the sciences first, what the data of experience, how this relates to philosophical conclusions that people then draw, and their theology too. I mean, this is all connected.
Yeah, and I'd like to encourage everybody should be interested. So I'm hoping everybody will come to the site and try to, whet their appetite further for really grounding, because as I say, the physics is the first science, and if we leave it untouched, then we leave other people to control our thinking, and you would not want the people that are controlling your thinking, that not that they're bad people, but they don't know, they have basic loss of common sense because of this ungroundedness. And you really want to ground yourself, because that's what God calls you to, right? And say, we're in Advent now, so it's a good thing to bring out that he became a man so that we would, through his physicality, we would know about him and be able to grow in understanding of him. And that is what the sacraments extend. And so if we really want to appreciate, and I know we do, we really want to grow in truth, which we all do at some level. I mean, as long as we're here on this earth and we haven't committed against it. So I encourage everybody who really want to come and try to, get what they can.
Knowledge incarnated, as you called it. Yeah, so important for everything from bioethics to medical ethics. This all has application. Sacramental theology, moral theology, and on down the line.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rizzi. I appreciate it, and God bless. Wish you the best with the Institute for Advanced Physics.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Good talking to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.